Make a podcast, they said. It'll be fun, they said. I don't know where they are right now, but they are definitely not under a blanket in my office with me trying to kill all ambient sounds. My name is MaryAnna, and this is a podcast called Before Rome, and it's about mediumship and God. So, one of the things I was wanting to do with this podcast for quite a while, actually, is to show that there's really nothing to fear from mediumship. And in fact, it can be very healing, it can provide closure. And it's pretty amazing to know that the people that we love, the animals that we love, they're on the other side, basically waiting for us to get there. No hurry. Don't take that the wrong way. So, the first 3 or 4 episodes of this are gonna be very short for me to get my feet under me, for you to decide if you actually wanna come with me on this journey through this podcast. This is a series because, mediumship and God is something that I've been interested in for pretty much since I started this, because I would tell someone that I'm a medium, and they would shrink in fear or put up the sign of a cross or throw holy water on me. I'm actually kidding, there was no holy water, but that's the vibe you get from people who don't understand mediumship, right? You people out there producing amazing podcasts, more power to you. The learning curve on this son of a gun, frankly, is pissing me off. So that's where I am right now. So I'm recording this with a little bit of attitude. So, really quick, I learned mediumship about 10 years ago, give or take, and I actually started with tarot, so the mediumship was an accident, if you will. And I believed back in the day that there was about 6 mediums in the world, that they all came from the USA, that they were all celebrities. That is clearly not the case. Mediumship is very much a skill. It's very much inherent to being human, and it's very much something that you can learn. For thousands of years, human beings have reported dreams, visions, prophecies, spiritual encounters, divine messages, miracles, spirit communication, and experiences that seem to reach beyond the physical world. Long before modern religion, long before modern skepticism, and long before Rome shaped much of what is now called Western Christianity. In this podcast, we're going back to the sources. We'll explore the ancient world, early spiritual traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Orthodoxy, mysticism, folklore, paganism, and the experiences that have caused people throughout history to ask the same question: what are we encountering? And it's okay if you don't believe, and it's okay if you don't agree. I'm only asking you to be curious and give it a shot. I'm only asking you to listen. I'm not asking anyone to change their lives over my podcast, right? My beliefs, I guess. Today, if you tell someone you talk to the dead or communicate with animals, not just today, I'm sure it's always been this way, or that you receive information through dreams, or that you have spiritual experiences you can't explain, they're probably going to say one of 3 things: that it's all in your head, that it's a gift from God, or they'll tell you that you are possessed by a demon. There doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground. But I've always wondered, when did we start thinking this way? Because truly, after I learned it, I realized, I'm going to take a little left turn here. After I learned this, I realized it is legitimately a skill. This is inherent to being human, is the ability to talk to trees, talk to animals, talk to energy, talk to anything. I'll probably get a chuckle out of this, but I was driving down I-70 one time and my Jeep was like, oil, like it was screaming at me. It was screaming for oil. And it had done that for about a week prior. And I just kept, oh, I'll get to it. I'll get to it. So I'm coming down I-70 after skiing one day and my Jeep is screaming at me. So I pull over into one of the many gas stations along I-70. I get out, I go and check the oil in my Jeep, and it needed an entire, are those quarts? I should know this. And so I go inside and I pour it in. But that's just one example of how listening to literally everything around you, like you listen to your children, you never think twice about it. You know when your children are in pain. Sometimes you know who's about to call on the telephone and you don't really think about it, but that is this. That is this. That is energy talking to you. But I've gone on a left turn. So let's get back to my script. Okay. So they're either going to tell you it's in your head or that it's a gift from God, or they're going to treat you like you're possessed by a demon, and there's not a lot of middle ground. And I've always wondered, when did we start thinking this way? Because if you go back far enough into history, people weren't arguing about whether spirits existed. They were arguing about which spirits existed, and they weren't debating whether dreams carried messages. They were debating what the messages meant. And they weren't asking whether the dead could communicate. They were asking whether the dead should communicate. Like, how often should you reach out to the dead? How much advice should the dead be giving? Those were the kind of conversations they were actually asking. In other words, they were operating from a completely different set of assumptions than we do today. And that is what sent me down this rabbit hole. Well, that and Orthodox Christianity. Not whether mediumship is real, not whether animal communication is real. And it's not even about whether religion is right or wrong or which religions are right or wrong. But when did humans stop seeing the spirit world as an ordinary part of daily life? And to answer that question, we're going to have to leave modern America behind. We're going to have to leave churches behind. We're going to have to leave denominations behind. And we're going to travel back more than 2,500 years to the ancient Mediterranean world. This is where gods and ancestors, dreams and omens, spirits and messages from the unseen weren't considered unusual at all. They were simply a part of life. So, what if I told you that for most of human history, talking to the dead wasn't strange, and neither was hearing from God, and neither were prophetic dreams, or signs, or omens, or visions, sacred places, spirit encounters, or the belief that nature itself was alive? In fact, historically speaking, we are the odd people out. We're going to go back to a time when the spirit world wasn't considered supernatural, or at least it wasn't looked upon negatively as a supernatural experience. Maybe that's a better way to say it. It literally and figuratively was simply a part of everyday life. One of the biggest mistakes modern people make is assuming that ancient civilizations separated the physical world from the spiritual world, and they didn't. A farmer planting crops wasn't just planting crops. A storm wasn't just weather. A dream wasn't random brain activity. A river wasn't simply water. Everything had meaning. Like, legitimately, everything had meaning. Everything had purpose. Everything could potentially carry a message to you. To the ancient people, the world was alive, and it wasn't metaphorically. Whether you lived in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Northern Europe, Africa, Asia, or the Americas, most cultures shared one common assumption: human beings existed along unseen forces, and the dead were not always gone. Today, many people see death as a hard boundary, and literally speaking, I suppose it is. You're here, then you're gone. But ancient cultures viewed death differently. The dead remained a part of the community, and ancestors could and did offer guidance. They also offered protection, they offered warnings, sometimes comfort, and sometimes they were mischievous and they offered trouble. But many cultures left offerings for the dead, and many still do, not necessarily in America, but in other cultures and countries. There are many people who venerate their dead. Many cultures spoke to the dead, they honored the dead, and they asked the dead for assistance. And it wasn't considered bizarre, it was actually considered quite responsible. In fact, ignoring your ancestors could be viewed as dangerous. Ancient people didn't need to travel to church once a week to encounter the sacred. The sacred was everywhere. It was in the forest, it was in the river, the mountain, the sky, the household, the marketplace, the battlefield. Like, legitimately, the gods were involved in daily life. They weren't distant, they weren't abstract, they were present. A failed harvest might have spiritual significance. A successful hunt might be interpreted as divine favor. A strange dream could influence important decisions. And whether those interpretations were correct is a separate question. The important point is that nearly everyone believed the spiritual world interacted with the physical one. And dreams were taken quite seriously. Modern people often dismiss dreams as meaningless, and some of us have medicated ourselves right into not dreaming. But ancient cultures, frequently they did the opposite. Dreams could be warnings, messages, prophecies, guidance. In fact, kings used to consult dream interpreters. Priests used to interpret visions, and entire political decisions could be influenced by a dream. The idea that a dream might contain information from outside ourselves was considered completely reasonable. Now, keep in mind that just because people in the ancient world were talking to spirits and legitimately everything else that moved or didn't move, they knew that not every spirit was trustable. That is where things become important. Ancient people weren't stupid and they weren't naive. And I think sometimes that we think they were just because they're so far in the past. They did not assume that every unseen encounter was beneficial. In fact, many cultures believed that spirits were both helpful and harmful. And some spirits guided you while others would deceive you. Some spirits protected you while others would manipulate you. The idea that discernment was necessary appears over and over throughout history, and that was long before Christianity, long before modern religion, and people were already asking, how do we know what we're dealing with? That question hasn't gone away. We still ask that today. You see that all over social media. How do we know who we're dealing with? How do we know if we're really talking to the dead? Here's a question that I've been asked before that I thought was super interesting. How do you know that you're talking to the dead and interacting with a dead person versus just pulling it down out of the energy of their life or psychically or something like that? And my answer then and now, I don't. And I won't really truly know until I am dead myself and I get to the other side and I'm like, "Oh, this is how this works. Okay." Like, a lot of people in this niche like to think that they know everything. They like to think that certain gurus are to be taken 100% of the time. Everything they say is right. And I just don't operate that way. I ask questions of everything all the time. In fact, I'm a little bit annoying about my questions and deep dives and stuff like that. But I digress. As we move through this series, you're going to notice something interesting is that the religions and the cultures change, the names change, the explanations change, but one thing remains remarkably consistent is that why do human beings across thousands of years, across continents, across languages, continue reporting encounters with something beyond ordinary reality? Are they all mistaken? Or maybe they're all describing the same thing differently. And maybe the answer is somewhere in between. I don't know, but that's the journey we're about to go on. In our next episode, we'll move into the ancient Jewish world and discover that the people who produced the Old Testament lived in a reality filled with dreams, angels, visions, spirits, and the supernatural encounters. The world of the Bible actually may be far stranger than many modern believers realize. Until next time, keep asking questions. All right, so that's what my podcasts are going to sound like. They're going to sound scripted with me taking a left turn every now and then. Definitely, again, learning curve, right? So if you've made it this far, I think this will probably be about a 20-minute episode, if you will. This series, I'm going to be doing another one as well that's going to talk about forensic mediumship. I actually was a part of a case that the person of interest has now been arrested. I would love to be able to travel to his trial to put together what I brought forward as a medium and what was right and what wasn't right. It's called The Police Don't Like Mediums, the Gretchen story. And I will be putting that together along with this one. So as time allows. So this one I'm getting my feet wet with. I am learning the ins and outs of things. And hopefully you will come along with me on this journey. I am open to questions. I am open to guests. I would really love to have some guests on here. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with me. In fact, I would prefer to have some guests that want to argue. We don't have to be rude, but let's say that you believe in soul contracts. I don't. I would love to have you on here. Come make your case, right? I'm not going to be rude. I would hope that you wouldn't be rude either. But those are the kind of things I want to put forward. What else? Also, you're not supposed to say, I think that's it for now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.